Okay, we can go ahead and get started. Hi, everyone. Welcome to our second installment of our two-part deep dive series on public humanities training in higher education. Thanks very much for joining us on this Tuesday afternoon. Just a note on today's conversation that it will be recorded and you will be able to find a recording of it on the event page in the coming week or so. My name is Michelle May Curry, and I lead the National Humanities Alliance's Humanities for All initiative, which is the NHA's initiative that documents and supports publicly engaged humanities scholarship across higher ed. I'm very pleased today to be joined by Jacqueline Barrios and Judd Ruggill, who are both faculty in University of Arizona's Department of Public and Applied Humanities. Our conversation today builds on Humanities for All's recent report that documents existing approaches to training in the public humanities, including all different types of efforts to build undergraduate majors and minors and graduate masters and certificate programs, internship programs, workshops, the full range of sort of higher ed infrastructure that trains students and faculty in the public humanities. We'll drop a link in the chat to that report so you can view it. And so for the last several years, Humanities for All has been conducting a lot of research into what types of support faculty and administrators need in order to create this infrastructure, right? And based on this research, we've been producing resources and conducting consultations and workshops that help institutions identify the best course of action, right? Is it a graduate degree granting program that's possible, or is it perhaps a certificate or summer seminar or an internship that is a more sustainable model based on the skill sets and repertoires of faculty at the institution? And at the same time, though, we've been very attuned to the critiques of public humanities infrastructure from students and faculty who are skeptical, right, of the ever expanding university. I think these critiques tend to point out that tension between wanting to build up the structures of the university via gradual reform, and then on the other side, the fear of contributing to the sort of neoliberal capitalist impulses of the university, right? The churning out of humanities professionals, the creation of new revenue streams through new programs, et cetera, et cetera. And as a result, in this position, leading Humanities for All, I've constantly found myself asking that question of what these training programs look like on a nuts and bolts level, right? What do they look like on an impact level for students, for faculty, for partners, and what can we create at our respective institutions without reproducing the systems and structures that we are attempting to reform or work against? And that is why I'm particularly excited to be talking today with Dr. Barrios and Dr. Ruggill, whose respective and combined energies to found the Department of Public and Applied Humanities at the University of Arizona has garnered a considerable amount of attention in the last couple years, and in the humanities community broadly. And I reached out to them specifically because I deeply admire how they've been approaching these same questions and critiques with a lot of complexity. And I was introduced to their work through their chapter contribution to the Routledge Companion to Public Humanities Scholarship, which is a forthcoming companion edited text, which I've been editing alongside. I know we're about to submit the manuscript, this week, literally. I've been editing it alongside our former Humanities for All project director, Daniel Fisher-Livney, and hopefully they might get to touch on some of the things they talk about in that chapter. But before turning it over to them, I'd like to give you brief bios on both of their work. So Jacqueline Barrios is an assistant professor of public and applied humanities and specializes in projects that connect literature and urban spaces. The centerpiece of her public humanities work is her founding of Lit Labs, which is the subject of her forthcoming book project, Dear Charles Dickens, Love South LA, and how she centered the history and daily life of South LA teens in creative engagements with 19th century long form novels. Dr. Barrios is also co-founder of the Digital Salon with UCLA's Urban Humanities Initiative, a research program linking architecture, urban planning, and humanities scholars. And she also co-leads the formation of a global urban humanities network for emerging scholars in the field. And Dr. Judd Ruggill joined the University of Arizona in 2016 as part of the Computational Media Cluster Initiative, and in 2017 became the founding head of the Department of Public and Applied Humanities. Dr. Ruggill primarily researches play and the technologies, industries, and sociocultural phenomena that enables it. Alongside his colleague Ken McAllister, he co-directs the Learning Games Initiative, which is a transdisciplinary interinstitutional research group they founded in 1999 to study, teach, and build and archive computer games. Thank you to you both for joining us today. I'm so happy to be able to chat with you both. Ken, I would love if you could start by introducing the work of the department to us, perhaps by grounding us in a couple examples of work that you've been able to do with students and partners to date.
I wasn't sure if, Michelle, you said Judd's name or my name, or...
Oh, whoever would like to start.
Okay. Well, if I may, Judd, if I could just jump in, because I did think a lot about how to succinctly kind of present some of the work of our department. And so I did have a brief presentation I've put together about some of these examples. And so if I may, I'd like to just kind of frame our discussion with like a case study, and then we can kind of dive in more into some of the questions with our attendees. So without further ado, let me just share a screen for that. Okay. So my section is just sort of like thinking about examples as a way to ground our discussion. And this is sort of like an overview of what my time was looking like, where I wanted to really zoom in on one particular undergraduate course I finished teaching this spring as an example, and then kind of make a gesture at two other projects that I helped direct this year, and sort of end with some questions from just these specific concrete examples of the work that I, in particular, had been involved in our department. And so as a quick introduction, one second, get my notes out. As Michelle mentioned, I am an assistant professor at the University of Arizona, the Public and Applied Humanities Department. I'm starting my third year via scholarship in 19th century British and American literature and the global 19th century, parallel work on public and urban humanities. But I bring to this almost 20 years of experience as a public school teacher in South LA, where I first began to experiment with teaching literature, specifically 19th century novels through the lens of the city, a project that I call Lit Labs. I can talk more about that during the Q&A if people are interested. But really, since arriving to the university, so something like Southwest by South LA, so to speak, I've been engaged in translating this work through mainly the design of undergraduate education, from planning GE courses to ideating undergraduate research studios and internship experiences, and building on what I had been doing previously in Los Angeles within the New Borderlands context, scaling up my efforts as a practitioner and scholar to build up an emerging and interdisciplinary field of publicly engaged urban humanities. Which brings me to a focus example I wanted to present today, which is a redesign of a Public and Applied Humanities, or PH 200 course, which is an introductory core course for our major, but it's also a GE course. So it welcomes up to 50 students every semester, and it always fills up from across the campus and from multiple departments, and also at various points in their undergraduate career, anything from a freshman to a senior in or out of our major. And so this is actually a short video, which was coverage by our local evening news of a culminating event of this spring's PH 200. About 2 minutes long.
Celebration of the past and look ahead for Tucson's El Pueblo Center. It's a community hub for the South Side. The complex has grown to include a senior center, a healthcare center, a county library, and government social services, and a whole lot more. Guests at tonight's celebration include Congressman Raul Grijalva, Tucson's Mayor Regina Romero, among others. 13 News reporter Emily Miranda is there tonight.
This evening, the community got a first-hand look at photos and videos showcasing the center's cultural and historical significance. Everyone involved in tonight's event spoke about the important role this center plays in Tucson's South Side. No one more than Representative Raul Grijalva.
I really believe that places like this that have a connection to a community are very important.
For Representative Raul Grijalva and many in the community, this center is home.
No, our kids went to the daycare here. I worked here for 17 years. Mona, my better half, worked in the library as well here. And I grew up on this side of town, maybe I'm 2 miles from here. And so for me, it is home.
Since opening, it has served as a resource and safe place for Tucsonans on the South Side.
Here at El Pueblo, it really started from the very inception as a resource center for the community.
That is why many wanted to showcase its story here tonight. Students at the University of Arizona, in partnership with Sunnyside Foundation, helped showcase what the center was and can become.
When you go into it, you'll see what the past was, what this place used to be, and what we want it to become again, adjusting to the fact that these are different times.
People saw this transition through storytelling, photos, and designs. And Grijalva also saw this as a push for more.
You know, this place was basically abandoned and was considered a relic of other times. I think what these students and what the community is saying, reinvest in it, bring it back to life with the changes for these times that need to happen.
Grijalva also expressed his hope for the center's future.
That it be popping, that it be active, that people feel comfortable and safe taking back their space, and that we have a commitment to keeping the center at that level once again as an opportunity to give something to this community that's comprehensive and good.
Looking to the future of the center, city officials also said there are several projects in the works to help revitalize it for future generations. Reporting in Tucson, Emily Miranda, 13 News.
Okay, so
Celebration.
And so before I go further and narrate briefly the journey that led us to this, I wanted to frame the rest of what I'm going to be saying with this quote from the congressman, who became, in fact, as you may guess, an increasingly central part of our classroom community. Okay, so what does it mean to teach public and applied humanities to undergraduate students? Drawing from Raymond Williams's work on keywords, I designed this particular page 200 course to guide students through what I see as some of the central priorities of humanistic inquiry. So the study of narratives, for example, and their interpretation, or the investigation of histories, the coupling of knowledge to questions about our own agency as human beings to act and transform our world for its betterment. But an applied humanist needs to go further. And so the course sets up the humanistic learning experience to actualize these skills in the world with a different, I argue, a different set of keywords and questions that manifest the kind of expansive and interdisciplinary boundary crossing thinking we hope to engender in our students. So this brings me to the El Pueblo Urban Humanities Studio. And you can see here some of the questions that shape the course and how we turn to photography, especially to co-create visual narratives of a historic yet understudied site in our community. So as you heard, and what's playing in the background is a short video on El Pueblo. The center was founded in 1975 as part of broader movements of Chicano empowerment and activism. And the center remains to this day a hub for recreational and public services, neighborly exchange, and community placekeeping in Tucson's South Side. Located at the intersection of Irvington and 6th, it is adjacent to the Laos Transit Center, the Tucson Rodeo Grounds, and houses such key Chicano cultural landmarks as the Frank de la Cruz Public Library and the headquarters of Congressman Raul Grijalva. Wrapped in murals and memory and traversed by families and public servants, the center is now the focus of efforts by multiple stakeholders in the city and private sector for revitalization and reinvestment. And so sort of like where I stepped in and the university through the Public and Applied Humanities 200 course. And this, what's running in the background is a sample of the partnerships that sort of coalesce around this project, both from the community and on our campus. And so the students of PH 200 were able to join in these efforts around El Pueblo through visualizing the legacy and future of the site, which we presented in the successful fiesta you heard about earlier. Students deployed what I call an urban humanist toolkit, case studies, and archival research, site visits, spatial ethnography, interviews, photography, to name a few, to bring El Pueblo's cultural, historical, and speculative imaginaries into the public eye. And you'll see here just kind of a running slideshow of both the kind of community hosted events that we then supported, and then vice versa, some of the kind of academic, collaborative site visits and community photo shoots that they then kind of supported. So guided by the stories community members shared and philosophies of artists they studied, students created images about themes that intrigued and inspired them, from intergenerational celebrations held at the patio to traces of a lifetime of public service in the congressman's office. In staged candid shots and portraits, still life, and collages, a way of perceiving the center emerges. How to see the parking lots that launched Familias Unidos Ganando Accesibilidad, Fuga, bike rides, and COVID-19 vaccinations, or the meeting rooms that witnessed the UCAB historic advocacy for clean water, or the bus routes that encircle and connect us. Taken as a whole. And so some of these, so the exhibition actually now traveled back to the Center for Creative Photography on our campus. And so it's up there now as a satellite to the Community Fiesta exhibition. And if anyone is interested in kind of sample digital exhibitions that the students made, I have a link to that. So taken as a whole, the course allowed students glimpses of El Pueblo, the people whose daily lives and dreams, memories, and movements keep El Pueblo alive. Okay, so quite a long GIF, but we're still kind of like in the middle of the semester at this point. But it was just really an experiment for me to kind of really think about how the PH 200 course can become this node for multiple partnerships and engagements with, a really focused site that was important to our community partner. So I'm just going to, from here, offer two more examples as sort of zoom out case studies to see how something like PH 200 is nested within a capacious understanding of some of the possibilities of public and applied humanities on a campus. And the first is the establishment of the Urban Humanities Network, a consortium in this endeavor. And in this endeavor, the University of Arizona was joined by partners at Harvard, Princeton, UC Berkeley, UCLA, and Washington University, St. Louis. And we're actually still continuing the work of building this consortium, which launched by conceiving, hosting the inaugural Global Urban Humanities Unconference also last spring, to really think about this interdisciplinary research and engagement around spatiality. So the Unconference was sort of our signature event that we wanted to try out, a long weekend of intellectual collaboration and community building, where nearly 80 scholars, artists, practitioners, and community leaders charted a path forward for the next generation of research design and public engagement. And so you can see here the conference was hosted at sites ranging from the Forge in downtown Tucson to Biosphere 2 in Oracle, Arizona. So really trying to think about the Unconference as rooted in place, as not sort of portable in a nondescript sort of hotel, but kind of really embedded in the fabric of our city. Attendees conducted place-based workshops and site visits, networked at receptions at the MoCA Tucson, and altogether immersed themselves in our local scene as they shared and collaborated about the future of urban study. And the second example I wanted to talk about is an exhibition called The Book of the City, which launched in October at the MoCA Tucson. And running on this slide behind me is an overview video of the project, which actually lives now on bookofthecity.com. The virtual version of the exhibition, which just went live this summer. So I invite you to check it out. Book of the City is an exhibition that culminated Big Book Field Studio, Design Methods and the Canon, a studio I directed based. So this would be a more experimental project with 9 members, interdisciplinary team of architects, artists. I think one of my colleagues is here right now who participated in the project, scholars, and both four undergraduate students and 1 graduate student, a choreographer, a designer. All of them crafted works in response to the novel using the literature-based design research methods of lit labs. And so from stereographs of bus shelters to a figurine installation paying tribute to collected from thrift stores, from zines paying tribute to the Tanque Verde swap meet to choreography inspired by the El Tiradito shrine, each project showcased how a public and applied approach to reading novels, in this case, can call into being a Dickensian vision in the desert, a collective Tucsonan tale of the city. The studio sought to reimagine the undergraduate student as a fearless reader, able to surface emergent questions that would make such books matter in our time. So, so just to conclude, just some questions I think that came up in my mind as I was putting this together. First, I hope that these examples will ground our discussion from here about the possibilities and urgencies for publicly engaged humanities within and through institutions of higher education, with what we've been able to do at Arizona as a starting point. And I'd like to leave us with some of my ongoing questions as I do this work. What value do we bring as humanist scholars and educators to partnerships that kind of think about what's the value add, for work that's already kind of transpiring in community? The second question is something we addressed in our article together for the Routledge Companion. How do we make work legible to multiple stakeholders? And finally, how are we producing knowledge? I think as publicly engaged humanists, for audiences, specifically a kind of student that does not yet exist. So that kind of helps guide me think about, sometimes some of this work of producing public humanities. I think that comes in under like 12 minutes, but.
Jacqueline, thank you so much for immediately getting us into rich examples of what's possible in a department that calls itself a public and applied humanities department. I really appreciate just like getting us to the work itself as a starting point for then talking about the larger work of building a program or training students. And I like the question that you ended us on of for students that are yet to come, right? You're building something for people who you haven't met yet, potentially. And I'm wondering, Judd, if I could pass it to you now to sort of bring us to the work of building this program, right? What is it taken to build out a department of public and applied humanities, whether it's the nuts and bolts, right, of departmental meetings, or whether it's the broader work of envisioning emphases and major requirements, coursework?
Sure, Michelle. And thank you, by the way, for that that great introduction. I love the fact that you've been thinking about all the difficult and challenging questions. That's the most fun part of the work that we get to do, is the thinking.
You think so?
I do. I love it. Yeah, so thank you very much. And of course, thanks to Jacqueline. It's so great to get to review those projects, because I'm old, I forget. And even though these were all this last year, it's just so great to see them, and particularly in this context. And I also want to shout out to Harris and Brittany, who are 2 other faculty members from PH who are also here, taking time out of their busy summer schedules. So, obviously, if you have questions for them, I'm sure they'd be happy to chat. You asked what it's taken to build a department like PH. That's an interesting question. I think it's really about the people. That's all that it takes, is the desire, people's willingness to be creative and collaborative. I'm of the opinion, and it's probably the wrong opinion, but there are very few limits of what you can do at a university. I think there's a tendency to be disheartened and to lose hope, particularly perhaps in the humanities, that have long been a place that that I think certain facets of the university look at as just maybe service units or something that they think is important but not really. And so I think it's can be hard to be energized and creative and collaborative, but I think those are the most important pieces, because if you have a group of people that are willing to think and to be engaged and to support one another, there's lots of opportunity. And I say this coming from an R1 that's state funded, that has all kinds of financial challenges, I guess. Nothing particularly unusual, but nonetheless, financial challenges. There are some political challenges historically in a state like Arizona, but there's still all kinds of possibility at the university. And I remember when I interviewed for the job, as head, I didn't actually want this job. I wanted another job. This is the one that I got, and not another job, not at the university, or a different university. My first job when I came was to write a proposal for the Center for Digital Humanities. So I wrote a proposal for a center that I thought that I would like to lead, and it turns out I ended up interviewing for this job. But I remember asking the dean when I was thinking about it, I said, what do you like about this place? What do you like about the University of Arizona? Why should I take this? Why should I become the head as opposed to just being a faculty member? And he said, you can do anything you want here. He said, if I have an idea, I can walk across the campus and I can talk to somebody who's going to get super excited about it, and together we'll do it. And that's exactly what has happened with PAH. And I think that's what it takes to build a department, is just a willingness to do that. A willingness to find people who are interested and engaged. All the other stuff is pretty easy. I mean, it's work to do the financials and to make your pitches and to do that kind of infrastructural building, but that stuff is easy work for folks that are here, folks in this webinar, for example. So yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, Michelle, but happy to.
We'll also pass it back to Jacqueline if she has any thoughts about the work it's taken to build the actual department and program.
Yeah, I think, I came in, thanks for giving me some time to kind of like think through the question. I feel like I kind of came into a structure that was already just had that quality of being open. I think I came from pretty traditional literary department, and I feel like even in doing interdisciplinary work, you always feel like you're on the edge of things. And I felt like in the PH program, sort of like the edges are your home, and so I think that part of being able to see the outline of the course structure specifically, all of the different core courses that we have in our department, but being able to have the freedom to really kind of work through that form to think about how our particular research or our particular community engagement practices could fit within that structure was really important, I think, for the kind of work that publicly engaged humanities might look like on the ground. And I just want to say that because I've been thinking about, the transition from, working with South LA teens in a college bound program to undergraduate students at the University of Arizona, a huge, the kind of work that it takes to do that translation, you really do need the support of a department head and colleagues who can help you with just even the smallest questions. Like, okay, what does it look like to take 50 students on a bus ride down to Southside Tucson? Some of these kind of being able to have an environment where you can ask the nuts and bolts questions, but also but that there's an appreciation that you're not just asking about the bus ride. You're wanting recognition about that, what that means, to kind of have an experiential crossing over outside of the campus. So I think, I don't know, affective, intellectual kind of solidarity in kind of what you're doing. I think that's part of the work.
Can I just add to that? And this is super important, is you have to have folks that want to not only support each other, but push each other. That's one of the things that's been so great about the faculty in PH is that they've asked for unusual things. They want to do things that make sense to them and engage with them, but that might be foreign to the way things are done, not just in the humanities, but a university in general. And that's been fun because together we've been able to help shape structures that have normally been traditional. For example, we have a colleague who travels with a lot of additional accoutrement for research and performance. And the business office is like, why does this person need another suitcase? I don't understand it. Why are there always these excess baggage fees? And it took this sort of collective training of the administration to realize, oh, this is part of this person's research and performative portfolio. Of course they need this stuff. And so together, kind of collectively advocating, you can change these structures that, while they might make sense for work that was done decades ago, they're maybe not necessarily quite as appropriate to the work that folks are doing today.
Yeah, what I'm hearing from you both is that, and it's something that I've seen across really exemplary public humanities infrastructure across higher ed, that programs that had faculty support from the beginning, like the faculty were energized from the beginning before the program even existed, right, is a real determining factor of the longevity and expansiveness of the work that's able to be done, right? There's a difference between a program built on faculty collaboration versus a program built around the receiving of a big grant run by one faculty who is, pushing that grant up a hill. And I'm wondering, sort of, to tie it to some of the ways that you've been able to create certain emphases across the department. I know when students declare a major in the department, they also are able to declare certain emphasis alongside their degree of study. And I'm wondering how those emphases map on to sort of faculty support, faculty research, how you came about tying those certain emphases to the public and applied humanities, and if there are any really great examples of interdisciplinary work that you've been able to do as a result of having those emphases within your department.
Sure. I think originally the emphases came about because our dean had buddies. He had fellow deans that he was interested in working with, and that's how we got our original 4 emphases, and that's sort of underpinned the formation of the BA in Applied Humanities. We've since added 6 more, and we've got actually another one coming up this year. And it was really about the deans agreeing to figure out a way to support one another that made financial sense for both. And that's actually, if anybody's super interested in nuts and bolts, oh, hey, Kenny's here now. If folks are super interested in that, that has been quite productive, is helping other units understand that you don't have all the money, that if you can create an environment where everybody is enriched financially, everybody's supported, nobody's kind of just being a service unit to another unit, it's really great. And so initially that was the pitch from our dean to his fellow deans, is how do we, is there a way that we can work together that's good for everybody? And that's been particularly helpful in the work subsequently, because if you can demonstrate to folks that it doesn't cost them anything and the upside is really great, that ends up being pretty persuasive to a lot of folks, particularly in a resource challenged environment, which is not to say that universities aren't places where there's always more money, because there's always more money at universities, but it can often feel like, at least in local units or even larger collections of units like colleges and schools, that maybe the resources are a little tight. And so figuring out a way to work with somebody else to say, hey, this isn't gonna penalize you. So as far as the how faculty could connect, we've hired the most interesting faculty. The folks that have applied, we have an open search. And Jacqueline and Jonathan, who's not here, but Harris, who's here, can tell you the search is super open. We pretty much say, like, if you are interested in working here, apply. Because we're not interested in specializations. We're interested in people who are keen to do this kind of work, be collaborative, be open-minded. And so those haven't mapped necessarily to specific emphases. We've structured the degree such that the students will take, the degree is large, it's 42 units, which most BAs on campus are about 30 or 33. And so the students will take 24 units with us, and then they'll take 18 units with the partner college. And the partner college will really supply the sort of professional skills training that the students might need, say in business or public health or design. And so we don't hire for the emphasis, we hire for the people. And as far as projects come out, there's lots of interesting ones. I mean, we had talked earlier about consulting. That's part of how the kind of consulting facet of the department came about. Is we have a partnership with the Eller College of Business, College of Management, for our business administration emphasis, and they have a huge executive education program. That's one of their kind of large ancillary revenue streams. So they go out and they talk to Fortune 500 or Fortune 100 companies and offer them executive leadership training. And so as part of the curricular partnership, we realized that the folks in the executive leadership training, they might also benefit from some humanities training. And so we've had folks help them out, say with training. We did a big project, was last summer with the Community Foundation of Southern Arizona, which is a large nonprofit, and we had PH faculty teach courses on fundraising. How do you do relationship-based fundraising? We had a faculty member teach on grant writing, because that's a pretty big in the NGO sphere. And we're going to be doing something with them again in February. They're doing a leadership training for, again, all these corporate leaders. And so I said, what kind of value adds could the humanities offer? So we had said, well, how about some work on sort of anti-racist leadership or gender expansive leadership for these public servants? And so that's has led to these other kinds of partnerships. So the partnerships were initially personal, that is dean to dean, two deans going out and having a drink and saying, like, hey, how do we thrive? Then it becomes curricular through the Bachelor of Applied Humanities, and then now it becomes consultative through in this case, Eller Executive Education, or some of the work we do with other colleges and universities. So I don't know if that answers your question.
It absolutely does. And I'm fascinated to hear of how the emphases came about as a result of relationships across deans and across schools. And it makes sense also that, you're able to then have an open door policy in terms of how you hire, right? It's a combination of relationships existing and then also what we can create with who we bring in.
Deans are faculty too. And faculty have no problem going and hanging out with other people that they find interesting. I mean, it's hard to remember that deans and even provosts and presidents are like that, but deans especially, I mean, they want to work with their people that they like and have great ideas and put stuff together. And so it makes it then easier for the faculty to do that, because the faculty are already doing that.
Right. I have one more question before I want to open it up to audience questions. And please, as we're talking through this last one, maybe feel free in the audience if you'd like to type things in the chat or start to raise your hand. I'm happy if you all want to unmute or turn on your video in order to ask questions. But my last question has to do with undergraduate versus graduate training in the public humanities. And you all have created an undergraduate program, a major in public and applied humanities. And, putting together the report on training in the public humanities this past winter, I saw a real range of programs that existed for graduates, at the master's and at the PhD level, and then a range of programs for undergraduates. And I'm curious, just from your position teaching undergrads, and then maybe perhaps in your experience mentoring graduate students, or in your experience, coming out of graduate programs, what you see as the benefit or the difference for undergraduates at the public humanities level.
I'm going to just jump in on this one because I've been thinking a lot about it, given the work this past year, and having come from, I think, a pretty robust graduate experience with the Urban Humanities Initiative at UCLA, where I got to really do or see like what that training could look like, and train graduate students on urban humanities methodologies and pedagogies. So I've like try to adapt different things for undergraduates. And I just felt like one quick insight with undergraduate training versus graduate training, I almost feel like they're the same, but you just have, and I think part of it is like really like bringing the expectations, the creativity and the kind of this ways in which we expect graduate students to create research and collaborate, like bring those expectations into the undergraduate classroom, because those are what energizes learning. But you just provide more of that scaffolding, and that sort of like breaking those pieces down a little bit more. So I almost feel what's been really exciting for me is that, I have the sort of like PH 200 course, but I had, I'm developing sort of like an undergraduate research team to kind of like that from previous students, former students, undergraduate students who are already as undergraduates thinking about, public humanities work. And they kind of are also TAs in my class. So this sort of like pipeline idea is what I feel. It's not a difference, but I think it's almost like a similarity. You kind of have to start seeing the continuum really of how this sort of work transpires. To be honest, I feel that part of the challenge of doing graduate work in public and applied humanities, you can't start that work at the graduate program, right? You have to bring in that experience already. And so I think the experience of being able to engage with community partners, to be able to see beyond, to see like a coextensiveness between your classroom and beyond. So
if I could just add one thing too. Jacqueline and I had a series of conversations this year about graduate students' orientation to some of the work that she was doing, and it was illuminating for me in the sense that the undergrads, while they may not necessarily be as sophisticated educationally as the graduate students, are often more willing to just go with the project. They're like, yeah, this sounds great. This is what we're doing. Whereas the grad students there can be challenges associated with their kind of vision of what it is that they want to do, since they're a little bit farther along the professional spectrum. And sometimes amazing, beautiful, creative work like Jacqueline is doing there can be a disconnect or a disjunction for the graduate student, because they're like, well, this isn't being a professor. This isn't the peer-reviewed article I'm supposed to be writing. This isn't the research that, say, my faculty in English or something like that are teaching me to do. And so there can be a kind of a level of discomfort there, which can be productive, but it also can be challenging. And I can imagine for folks who have graduate programs, that's kind of an issue to take on. Is how do you help folks get to that state, or return to that state, I guess, of just being open to possibility. So I see some questions. I see a question.
Yeah.
Which is from Christy Brooks. I don't. I can take a stab at this one, Jacqueline, if you want. Which is how do you manage the politics of starting continuing PH with other humanities departments? We are fortunate, I guess, here at the University of Arizona to have, our previous budget model and now our current budget model. The responsibility center is the college, and the college basically distributes resources down to the individual departments. And so the health of the college is paramount. And so if you have that level of management and one unit is doing really well, the resources get distributed out to everybody else. So in terms of managing the resource politics, that's taken care of by the fact that you have a responsibility center that's above you. That's not always ideal, because sometimes you don't necessarily see the direct fruits of your labor, but it does do a lot to quell difficulty. And I would say with other units that another issue is that the humanities units that we have in our college, they're also very different from one another. So it's not nobody's competing with one another in that sense, because everybody is doing different kinds of things. Reminds me of just as I say this, it reminds me of when I was taking the degree through the Senate 7 years ago, 8 years ago, whenever it was, 7 or 8 years ago. That was a concern from units across. Like, well, this is something we want to do. How do you balance competition? And I said every unit is in competition for the students if you want to look at it that way, right? The student comes to the university and they can choose anything that they want, right? They could choose to major in physics or engineering or nursing or law or dance or education. And so if it's only about competition to you, then you're constantly in competition with every other unit on campus. It really is about providing spaces for students to find things that they're most interested in that fits well with them, and a faculty that can attend to those needs. So how it's going 6 years in, I think pretty good. If you're asking from a politics question, I all the heads and I, we all get along. We have about 300 majors. Probably going to be hiring again this year. So yeah, it seems to be going pretty well. We've hired 11 people since we started. So the 11 people in 6 years. So yeah, I think good. Does that answer your question, Christy?
Yeah, thanks very much.
Other questions from the audience? Feel free to raise your hand or type in the chat. I'm happy to keep asking questions.
And while we're waiting for that, I just wanted to quickly, it's more like a follow-up question maybe to that. And it helps that I feel like, there's politics happens at many levels, so there's the kind of like the dean level, and then there's the new junior faculty level where, you kind of learn about like, well, that stuff that's more institutional, but, relationally, like faculty to faculty, like I felt like there was just a way in which you can navigate, like you can construct collaborations and partnerships, across. I found that was like one way of, an opening, I guess, for like working through politics, not having too much power at this point, and so, but the other thing I wanted to say is, and I'm wondering, Judd, if you can speak to, the success of the department as really kind of a way in which that really helped, or the fact that we do have, a robust enrollment, the fact that we are able to also kind of like a win-win situation with the other units. I think there's, hard to say, like, well, like the students kind of like become part of the politics, right? Like what they opt into. And I think the fact that they choose a major, I also want to say, like, we have a pretty robust internship program that helps. I almost think of the PH program as what the humanities does well, like an interpretation of your undergraduate experience. It helps them kind of like understand, what specialization and, professionalization looks like with this larger set of kind of like liberal arts questions. And so I think we provide a space for that. It's not for everyone, but it definitely created a space that students then opt into. So I think that's like turning to the student, and meeting their needs where they're at as a way to think about politics of the university. Okay. And I see a Lit Labs question. Shall I just take that really quickly?
Go for it.
So Lit Labs is a project, a public humanities project hub that I founded that thinks about how to do publicly engage site-specific projects around the study of literature. It kind of came out of my work with South Los Angeles teens as a public school teacher, and working and developing this partnership with the Dickens Project. I'm mainly thinking about novels in this case. I'm writing about it. So if you're interested in Lit Labs, I think there'll be a forthcoming book about about those projects in how I developed Lit Labs, how I founded it, and the methodology that I'm calling emplaced reading, how to think about the reading of literature in engagement with the city. And so since the Lit Labs projects in South LA, I've started to kind of work on it in Tucson. So the Book of the City project is the most recent Lit Lab, for example, that I directed. So at its core, it's a core text, a literary text, and then kind of pedagogical, cultural, publicly engaged programming around that novel with interdisciplinary partners. Hope that answers that question. I'm building out a website because there's an old one. I don't really want to, I can drop that in, but it's still sort of like in flux right now. But the Book of the City probably has the most kind of recent work. And my collaborators are actually here, Harris and Kenny from architecture and performance and queer studies, kind of taking David Copperfield and seeing what they could do with that, with a brief. So in my book, I kind of start talking about the difference between a prompt, which is an assessment tool that we're familiar with in the humanities, versus something like a design brief, which is what a Lit Lab would do with the novel.
I just want to return to something that you said before, Jacqueline, which I think is worth kind of repeating here, which is that the students are great PR for the unit, because they're the ones who choose the degree, and they're the ones who do these fabulous projects, and they're great ambassadors. And it also returns to that question about this idea of competition, which is we're not in competition with Spanish. Right, the students who are pursuing a Spanish language or culture degree aren't necessarily going to be interested in public and applied humanities. That's not the degree that they're pursuing. The one they're pursuing is the one that they're most passionate or most interested in. Same thing with sort of French and Italian, or in another college, say a physics degree. We're serving the students' particular interest. They will find their way to us, and that's certainly one thing I think to keep in mind is we don't do any PR. we don't really do any recruiting. The students kind of find their way to us, thanks to our partners, but also simply because their interest. They see these incredible faculty that they get to work with, and that becomes the story for them. So again, in that idea of students competing with one another, or how you find them, I think you serve the students the best way that you can by doing the best work that you can, and the students, they're into it, and they show up, and they get excited, and they tell their friends.
That's incredible that you have 300 majors with very little PR work.
It's actually been, that would be a challenge that I would kind of want to highlight for folks, is that if you embark on new work, it's easy to fantasize about kind of success, at least numerically. It's really hard to plan for it, and you end up having to do a lot of decision making on the fly, because we weren't ever targeting this many students. I mean, I'm sure our dean in the back of his mind, as any dean, was probably like, oh yeah, there's going to be thousands of students. That's the standard dean visioning of a university. So I'm going to have them all. I'm going to have all 50,000 students at the University of Arizona. But just we were planning on a much kind of much smaller program, and it just that's not what has happened so far. And so it becomes about adapting to kind of what the interest is and what the level of engagement is, and making strategic decisions about hiring, about course scheduling, about dumb things like number of students in classes, but really trying to imagine how you balance kind of the fiscal responsibilities and needs of a unit with the humane needs of its people. So.
And maybe to end us on a future focused note, I'm curious what you are looking to build or grow in the immediate or far distant future for this program. Are there, structures or new emphases or new types of partnerships you're really excited about growing right now?
Do you want me to answer that, Jacqueline, or do you want to take a stab?
You can take it, Judd. I'm you know what I'm trying to do in the most immediate future. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. What we're trying to do, Michelle, I think, is whatever the faculty want to do within reason, which is as long as nobody's committing any crimes or irrevocably breaking anything. It's really what this group of people want to do individually and collectively. That's the university is a place to experiment, to explore, and I think it's disheartening and really bad for morale. And if you can't do that, and so the idea, I think, with the department is to bake in that culture of support and collaboration, but also that culture of experimentation, of trying things. Again, not anything, because some things you can look at them and you say, yeah, that's probably not the direction that we want to go, or would be a bad idea for any number of reasons. But for the most part, kind of the freedom for people to explore and experiment, the freedom for them to fail, as we kind of reach out and figure out who we want to be. That's been the subject of our retreat every year, is who do we want to be? And it's we never seem to land on an answer. I think it's just about continuing to explore and grow and seeing what's possible. And there really haven't been any limitations so far. And I don't know what those limitations would be. If you have a creative and engaged group of people, they don't have to be best friends, but they have to be professional and support one another. If you have that, then there's really no challenge that can come up that you can't have some other way of engaging with, or some possibility of exploration or feeling your way through, or strategizing. And that's one of the great things about this group of people, is they all have all these diverse experiences. And so invariably, if a challenge comes up, someone says, oh, well, what if we do this? Or I did that once and this is how we navigated it. And so it ends up becoming not really an issue, just becomes work. And work is easy.
What a blue sky for us to end on, right? The sky is the limit. Thank you so much to you both for your time this afternoon, and to our audience for their attention and participation. A recording of this will be posted in the event page within the next week or so. And I would encourage you all to reach out if you have any questions or would like to connect with anyone on this call. But other than that, thank you so much. Have a great afternoon, everyone.